Today's book review is American Gods by Neil Gaiman. I read this book primarily because I was coming back to Vietnam after visiting friends and family in America, and the flight back to Vietnam is just brutal. It's like 14 hours to Tokyo, change planes in Tokyo, 5 hours from Tokyo to Saigon. It's like 20 hours in the plane. So I needed something to read, and preferably I needed something kind of light reading because, you know, like the plane is rocking back and forth, you know, gives you a headache. It's difficult to concentrate on anything kind of too heady. You just want something kind of light and breezy and easy to read. So I was in the bookstore and I headed straight for the fantasy section because that's where you find kind of all the, you know, light and breezy reading. I'm a fantasy nerd. And I saw this, and this is one of those books that people have been recommending to me for years. Several people over the years have recommended this book to me, like people whose opinions I respect. And I've just been meaning to get around to it and just never had a chance. And then I was like, right, there it is. So I just snatched it up. I have not read anything by Neil Gaiman before, kind of. I read Good Omens, which he co-wrote. But you know, when you're reading that, it's difficult to know how much of that is Neil Gaiman and how much of it is his co-author. So I, for all intents and purposes, I didn't really have a good idea of his writing style. But as you know, he's a famous author and people really love him. Like, he's got a lot of devoted fans. And in fact, when I went to the register to buy this book, the guy behind the cash register said, "Oh, that's one of my favorite books." He said, like, Neil Gaiman's a wonderful author. The guy said he's like a friend sitting next to you and telling you the story, is how he described it. So, you know, made me feel better about my purchase. And also, you probably already know this, but this book is going to become a TV series very soon. Like, I think the first episode's coming up in the next couple weeks on Star's original series. I'm not sure if I'm going to watch it or not. I don't think I have Star's in my cable package here, but if, I don't know, I'll check it out if I get the opportunity. So anyways, the review. It's not a bad book. I've got some mixed feelings about it, especially for its value as an airplane book. The writing style is very, like, the guy who checked it out for me at the cash register was right. Like, Neil Gaiman is kind of almost like a friend sitting next to you, telling you the story. Like, the writing style is very easy to read, it flows, it's a good prose. And Neil Gaiman has some imagination. Like, there's a lot of interesting ideas put in here. Without giving too much away, I'll just kind of briefly summarize the plot. It's American Gods. The premise of this book is that many of the gods came over from Europe with the immigrants. The idea is that, not only from Europe actually, the Indian and African gods, just kind of anywhere there were immigrants coming to America, they brought their gods with them. Over the years, people have stopped believing in these various gods, which makes them weak. I guess it's never explicitly spelled out, but it seems to be that the gods get their power from people worshiping them. When people stop worshiping them, the gods begin to lose power. So there's all these kind of gods walking around America who are so weak they've just kind of assumed kind of normal jobs, and, you know, like one's working in a slaughterhouse, or one's working at the god of the dead is working at a mortuary, things like that. And then there's a war, but to say, and things kind of get into motion. To say too much about it would be giving away the plot. And this is one of those books where there's like a lot of little surprises kind of snuck in there. So I don't really want to give away too much of the plot. You if you're intending to read this book, my advice is to not to read up on it before you actually read it. Just kind of go into it as blank as you can. And there are all sorts of little surprises tucked away in it. There's a lot of interesting references to mythology if you're kind of into that. Kind of, you know, of course, the Norse and Greek gods are quite famous. But Neil Gaiman has done his research, so, you know, there's Eastern European gods in here that he's kind of researched and put into his book. There's African gods and Indian gods, and I forget where all these gods come from. He's done his research, so he puts in the famous gods here as well as some of the more obscure gods from different parts of Europe or Africa or India or something. The thing about this book that got me a little bit is it's incredibly slow moving. And he just put so much detail into everything. And I'm not sure it really worked for me as an airplane book. I mean, I finished it because I had nothing else to read on that airplane. But like it was, you know, when I was kind of 8 hours into the flight and still kind of slowly plodding through this book, I kind of thought, I wish it would just get on a bit. And there were like a lot of vision and dream sequences, like a lot. And I'm on the plane, of course, and it's like, oh, jeez, another vision sequence. And you know, these vision sequences, I mean, you know how this genre works. They're convoluted, they're mysterious, there's a lot of different images. It's like, you know, like a LSD trip or something like that. And it's, of course, it's a book equivalent of it. So it's not like all the moving images that you would see on a film representation, but same kind of thing, just in prose form. He does his best to kind of write in all those images. And it was just, for my money, there was kind of one too many of these vision and dream sequences. Maybe that's because I was on the plane and just kind of reading this all in kind of one 20-hour binge. But it tried my patience a little bit. The other thing is there's an incredible amount of detail just about setting the scenes. There's at one point in the book, the main character is kind of hiding out in this small part in Wisconsin, this small town in Wisconsin. And there's just so much detail about this small town. His conversations with his neighbors, his walking around this small town and stuff like that. And I was like, boy, I do not need this much detail at all. On the other hand, to give credit where credit is due, the good news is that Neil Gaiman can pretty much pull it off. He writes well enough, he describes the characters well enough that you do... If you're the kind of person who really likes to get immersed in a book and to get immersed in the whole world of the book and the whole scenery and setting and kind of feel like you're in that town with the characters and doing everything those characters are doing, then this is a good book for you. You'll get immersed in it. If you're the kind of person who wants a fast-moving plot and lots of action, then this is the opposite of the book for you. It would be a good idea to stay away from this book in that case. But if you're into this kind of stuff, Neil Gaiman does kind of pull it off. And again, not to give anything away, but one of the neat things about this, there's so much detail in here. And some of this detail is going to be important to the plot later on. Things that get dropped casually in conversation are going to turn out to be kind of major plot points later in the book. And a lot of it is just not going to be important at all. It's just not going to ever come up again. And the neat thing is, as you're reading this, you don't know what's going to be important or what's not. So it's a nice way of kind of hiding all that foreshadowing in just a mass of other irrelevant details. The plot points that do come in later in the novel are all set up, but like it's not obvious because there's just so much detail in there that, well, some of it's a little obvious, but a lot of it you don't. There's just so much detail you don't know what to pay attention to. So that's kind of cool. Some of this is because I have, let's see, can you read this here? This is the 10th anniversary edition here. It's not clear on the cover page, but you can see that on the title page. So Neil Gaiman originally published this book in 2001. This edition, which I picked up in the bookstore, is republished in 2011, and it includes all the stuff his original editor cut out. And he got to add it back in because, you know, this is because the book has been so successful and stuff like that. I suspect kind of part of the reason I felt this book was so slow moving and stuff like that was because I was reading the edition where he added back in all the stuff that his editor originally wanted out. You know, like probably his editor was right the first time. But I don't know, because, you know, like I haven't read the original one, so like I'd have to compare them and see exactly what was added in and how much it added to the book and stuff like that. I've read some reviews of the original book that said even the original book was kind of like long and meandering and kind of these qualities were even there in the original book, but they're probably more so in the 10th anniversary edition. 10th anniversary edition also includes a lot of other things, an interview, an appendix, an author's afterword, and even, I thought this was funny, discussion questions, reading group discussion questions, like, I don't know, I guess they're targeting the book club market here, but it, you know, it just kind of reminded me of like those like religious books that you get, you know, like the ones intended for Sunday school or small group discussion where they have group reflection questions, but then this is a completely secular book. I don't know, like, is that a thing with reading group discussion questions in books? First time I've seen it in a non-religious book. So, anything else? I think I'm going to end it here. That's pretty much all I have to say. So I would cautiously recommend it. Be prepared for something that's pretty slow moving, but the prose is very readable. He's a good writer. There's a lot of imagination in here, and if you're prepared for a slow moving book, it has its enjoyments. Okay.
Okay.